A Navy SEAL arrived in a quiet northern town for one simple mission, but the whole town seemed to be watching him from the start. On the first night, a strange howl echoed through the forest like a warning no one dared to explain. The next morning, bloody tracks in the snow led him to a cliff where 3 frozen puppies were barely clinging to life. His German shepherd, Koda, immediately lay beside them, using his own body to keep them warm. Those mysterious bloodstains were not the sign of an accident. They were the final cry for help from a mother dog dragged away into the darkness. And when Koda was stolen right before his eyes, the Navy SEAL realized he was no longer just saving a few puppies. He was facing an entire cruel trafficking ring. Where are you watching from? Please like, subscribe, and help us reach 1,000 followers so we can keep writing meaningful stories. Now, let's begin. Rowan Hale first saw the town from the far side of a frozen rise, where the road bent between white pines and opened into a valley washed with clean northern light. It should have looked peaceful. The sky over northern Minnesota was a pale winter blue, bright enough to make the snowfields shine like hammered silver. Smoke climbed from chimneys in slow, harmless ribbons. The rooftops wore soft caps of snow. A church steeple stood above the town square, and beyond it, the dark wall of forest waited beneath the sun like an old animal pretending to sleep. But Rowan had learned long ago that peaceful places could lie. He sat behind the wheel of his old dark truck, both hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, eyes scanning without seeming to scan. He was 35, tall at about 6 feet, lean and compact in the way of men shaped by distance rather than vanity. His face was clean-shaven, every line exposed. Square jaw, hard cheekbones, mouth set in a calm that did not invite questions. His dark brown hair was cut short in a military style, though just a little longer than regulation would have allowed. His skin was fair, but weathered by northern cold, and his gray-blue eyes carried the quiet look of someone who had seen enough to stop being surprised by ugliness. He wore an old military gray tactical combat shirt, the fabric softened by years of use, frayed lightly at the cuffs and shoulders. Beneath it, a dark red thermal shirt showed at the collar and wrists, the color a little too alive against the winter light. His combat pants were worn earth brown and moss green, faded at the knees, the cargo pockets sagging from use. Old military work boots rested against the pedals. A battered military watch circled his left wrist. Beside him in the passenger seat sat Koda. The German shepherd was 5, maybe 6, a working line dog with a cream gray-black sable coat and amber eyes that missed almost nothing. He wore a black harness trimmed in dark red, a sturdy handle stitched across the top. Koda was not restless. That was not his way. He held still with his head lifted, nostrils moving, ears shifting in tiny adjustments as the town came into view. Rowan noticed the dog's silence. That mattered more than barking ever had. "You feel it too," Rowan murmured. Koda did not look at him. His gaze stayed fixed on the town below. The assignment had come through a joint channel, neat and official on paper. Animal disappearances, suspected trafficking of trained dogs, possible links to stolen working animals across county lines. Rowan had taken jobs like this before, after leaving active duty. Quiet missions that sat between law enforcement, military records, and the kind of private rot no agency liked to admit existed. He was not there to kick in doors. Not yet. He was there to observe, confirm, and report. That was what the file said. But files were like maps. They showed roads. They did not show fear. The town sign stood at the valley entrance, half buried in snow. Wind Haven Ridge. Someone had painted a small pine branch along the bottom edge, cheerful and rustic, and the paint was fresh. Too fresh, Rowan thought, for a sign standing beside a road chewed by salt and ice. As he drove in, people noticed him. A woman carrying groceries paused outside the general store. A boy with a red scarf stopped dragging a sled across the sidewalk. Two men near the gas station looked up, spoke to each other, then looked away too quickly. None of them stared long enough to be rude. That was the first wrong thing. Fear rarely announced itself loudly. It lowered its eyes. Rowan parked near the town office, leaving the engine running for a few seconds while he studied the street. Small town. One main road. Clinic near the east side. Sheriff's office opposite the diner. Forest pressing close on three sides. Good sight lines from the municipal building. Too many blind approaches from the timber line. Before Rowan could step fully out of the truck, the sheriff appeared. He came from the side of the office as though he had been waiting behind the wall. Sheriff Marcus Kane was in his early 50s, tall and spare, with an iron-straight posture that made his winter sheriff's jacket look tailored even beneath the bulk. His hair was salt and pepper, neatly cut. His face was narrow, controlled, clean-shaven, except for a faint gray shadow along the jaw. He had pale brown eyes that smiled a second after his mouth did, never before. Everything about him seemed orderly. Polished badge, dark gloves, creased trousers, black boots without a smear of slush. A man like that did not merely enter a scene. He arranged it. "Rowan Hale," Kane said, extending a hand. "Right on schedule." Rowan took the hand. Kane's grip was firm, dry, practiced. "Sheriff Kane? Long drive? Long enough?" Kane gave a small laugh, the kind meant to soften a room without giving anything away. "Roads get ugly this far north. Glad you made it before dark." Kota had stepped down from the truck and stood at Rowan's left side. His ears tilted toward Kane. Not pinned, not aggressive, just attentive in a way that made Rowan feel the old battlefield nerve wake beneath his ribs. Kane looked down at the dog. Beautiful animal. "Koda," Rowan said. "Koda." Kane repeated the name as though filing it somewhere. German shepherds always did have a look in the eyes, like they know the joke before you tell it. Rowan did not smile. Koda did not move. Kane glanced toward the street. Rowan followed his gaze and saw the woman with the groceries hurry through the general store door. The boy with the sled vanished around a corner. Even the two men at the gas station had found something urgent to do with their hands. "I'm told you've been briefed," Kane said. "I've read what they sent." "Then you know there isn't much to see here." Kane's voice stayed friendly. "Some missing dogs, mostly farm animals wandering off, people getting nervous because winter makes everything sound worse than it is. People usually call that wildlife." "They do?" Kane's smile thinned. "Until they hear wolves at night." Koda's ears rose at the word. Rowan caught it. Kane caught Rowan catching it. For a moment, the three of them stood in the bright cold, and the town around them seemed to hold its breath. Then, Kane clapped his gloved hands once, cheerful again. "Come on, I'll show you to the cabin." The cabin stood at the western edge of town, where the last plowed road gave up and the forest began. It was an old ranger rental, according to Kane, unused for 2 winters and weather-beaten enough to prove it. The roof sagged slightly under snow. The porch boards were warped. One shutter hung crooked, tapping softly whenever the wind moved. Behind it, the woods rose dense and dark, pine trunks crowded together like witnesses who had agreed not to testify. Rowan stepped from the truck and studied the place. "It'll hold," Kane said. "Stove works. Waterline freezes if you don't keep the fire going. Generator's temperamental, but she'll forgive you if you curse at her politely." Rowan looked at him. Kane shrugged. "Old habit. Everything in this town works better if you don't make it feel judged." There was humor in it. Almost. Kota moved toward the porch, sniffed the lower step, then turned sharply toward the tree line. His body went still. Rowan followed his gaze. Nothing moved between the trees. No bird. No deer. No squirrel stitching across the snow. Just forest. Stillness could be natural. Rowan knew that. But this stillness felt held down. Kane walked up beside him. "He smell something?" "Probably. Wolves come close sometimes." Kane's tone remained light. "Best keep him near you after sunset." Rowan turned slightly. "That common?" "Common enough." Kane looked toward the trees, and for the first time since Rowan had met him, the sheriff's expression did not perform friendliness. It flattened. Not fear, not concern. Possession, as though the forest belonged to him, and he disliked anyone noticing. Then the mask returned. "I'll leave you to settle in." But he did not leave immediately. Rowan saw his eyes move across the truck bed, the cabin door, the windows, Koda's harness, Rowan's old watch. A full inventory taken in less than 2 seconds. A man trained to notice would have admired it. Rowan only marked it down. By late afternoon, the cabin smelled of dust, cold iron, and old pine boards. Rowan swept broken glass from beneath one window, tightened the hinges on the door, checked the lock, cleaned the stove, and stacked firewood near the hearth. The work settled him. It always had. A damaged place made more sense than a damaged person. Wood either split clean or did not. Metal either held or failed. People were harder. Kota explored each room once and then chose a place near the front window. Not beside the stove. Not on the blanket Rowan unfolded for him. Near the window. Watching. Rowan ate from a tin plate while standing at the counter. Outside, the town faded from gold to blue to the deep violet of winter evening. One by one, lights appeared in distant windows. Warm squares, human squares, fragile little temples against the dark. He thought of the mission file again. Missing dogs, trained dogs, reports withdrawn, witnesses reluctant, local law enforcement cooperative. That last phrase bothered him most. Cooperative could mean helpful. It could also mean ready. Around 9, Rowan stepped onto the porch. The cold hit clean and sharp, the kind that filled the lungs like broken glass but left the mind strangely bright. Kota came with him, silent at his knee. The town was asleep, or pretending to be. Far down the road, a porch light flickered off. Somewhere beyond the clinic, a generator coughed, then settled. The forest stood black under the moon, its branches silvered with frost. Then the sound came. A howl rose from the trees. Long, low, too even. Koda's head snapped toward the forest. His hackles lifted, not fully, just enough to draw a dark ridge along his back. Rowan had heard wolves before. Real wolves sang with wild variation, one voice breaking into another, distance and hunger braided together. This was different. The howl stopped. 3 breaths later, it came again. Same length, same pitch, same pause. A signal. Rowan felt the old part of himself go very still, not frightened, focused. In another life, that stillness had arrived before ambushes, before doors were breached, before the world became noise and smoke. Now it came under moonlight, beside a cabin, with a dog pressed against his leg. Then, faint beneath the wind, another sound moved through the trees. An engine, not close, not on the main road, somewhere deeper, where no ordinary vehicle should have been traveling after dark. Koda gave one low growl. Rowan placed 2 fingers lightly on the dog's harness. Easy. But his own eyes stayed on the forest. The howl came once more, this time from farther away, or from something moving. Rowan stood there until the cold bit through his gloves and the moon climbed higher over Windhaven Ridge. Behind him, the cabin fire cracked and muttered like an old man telling bad jokes to keep death out of the room. Ahead of him, the forest waited, dark and organized. Kane had said, "Wolves." Rowan did not believe him. Not entirely. And somewhere in that shining northern darkness, something answered the howl with the low fading rumble of a truck. Morning came too bright, the kind of brightness that made the world look innocent. Sunlight poured over Windhaven Ridge in thin, cold sheets, striking the snow until every roof, fence rail, and pine branch seemed dusted with powdered glass. From the cabin porch, Rowan Hale watched the town pretend to wake like any ordinary northern town. Chimneys breathed. A pickup rolled past with chains rattling softly around its tires. Somewhere far off, a church bell gave 2 sleepy notes and then quit, as if even sound knew not to linger too long there. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low. Rowan had not slept much. Not because of fear. Fear had never been his trouble. Fear was honest. It arrived, named itself, and could be handled. What kept him awake was pattern. The small wrongness of things, and the sheriff who knew too much, the townspeople who looked away too quickly. Koda standing at the window deep into the night, his amber eyes tracking the dark woods, as if something in there was moving behind the trees without moving the branches. Now, in morning light, the forest looked harmless. That made Rowan trust it even less. He dressed without hurry, pulling on the same worn military gray tactical combat shirt, the old fabric soft from use and weather. The dark red thermal layer beneath it held what little warmth the cabin had given him. He checked his boots, tightened the laces, clipped a compact field kit to his belt, then slid his old military watch around his wrist. The motion was automatic, quiet, almost ceremonial. Time mattered in the field. So did noticing when it stopped making sense. Kota waited by the door. The German shepherd's sable coat caught the morning light in bands of cream, gray, and black. His black harness with dark red trim sat snugs across his shoulders, the handle along his spine worn from use, but solid. He did not whine. He did not paw at the door. He simply stood there, ears forward, gaze steady. Rowan looked at him and felt a faint tug in his chest. "You already picked the direction," he said. Kota blinked once. That was enough. They left the cabin just after 7. The snow behind the porch was crisp under Rowan's boots. He moved around the side of the cabin, not toward the road, but toward the thin line where yard became wilderness, and the forest began gradually, with small young pines and low brush buried under snow, then thickened into older timber. Tall trunks rose black and brown from the white ground, their branches heavy with frost. There was beauty in it, brutal and clean. A cathedral built by weather. Koda moved ahead, but never too far. He worked in disciplined arcs, nose low, then lifted, then low again. Not hunting, reading. Rowan let him. The first strange sign came less than 200 yards from the cabin. A shallow track crossed between two pines, half filled with overnight powder. Rowan crouched beside it. Not fresh enough to identify cleanly. A wide tire mark, maybe from an ATV or light utility vehicle, pressed beneath the newer snow. Too faint to mean much, too deliberate to ignore. He touched the edge with two gloved fingers. Compacted, repeated traffic. Not a single accident of movement. Koda had stopped 10 yards ahead. The dog stood rigid, looking toward a narrow dip in the terrain where the ground sloped into denser trees. His tail was low, not tucked. Rowan rose slowly. "What is it?" Koda did not answer in sound. He moved. Rowan followed. The forest swallowed the cabin behind them with surprising speed. After a few minutes, there was no sign of town, no chimney smoke, no road noise, only the hush of snow and the soft scrape of Rowan's boots. The air smelled of pine resin, frozen bark, and something metallic so faint it might have been imagination. Then Koda stopped again. This time Rowan saw it. A stain on the snow, dark red. Not much. A thumb-sized mark near the exposed root of a pine, already crusted at the edges from cold. Rowan crouched, his breath making a pale cloud in front of his face. He did not touch it at first. He looked around. No torn fur. No drag marks yet. No obvious kill site. Koda sniffed once, then pulled his head back slightly. His ears shifted toward the west. Rowan's jaw tightened. Blood in snow was rarely subtle. It announced itself like a small war. But this was not scattered, not sprayed. It sat in one place, almost placed there, then continued in another small stain several feet away. A trail. Rowan took out a slim field marker from his kit and placed it near the first stain. Then he moved to the next. Another drop. Then another. The line led deeper into the trees. "Slow," Rowan whispered. Koda obeyed. They followed the blood. The trail did not behave like a wounded deer. A deer would stumble, cut sideways, seek cover, leave sharp hoof marks and disturbed brush. It did not behave like a wolf kill either. There was no churned snow, no sign of a pack circling, no wide fan of struggle. Instead, the marks came in broken intervals, sometimes disappearing beneath soft wind-blown powder, then returning in darker smears where the snow had been pressed hard. After another 30 yards, Rowan found the first drag mark. 2 parallel grooves ran through the snow, shallow but clear, as if something narrow and heavy had been pulled along the ground. Between them, the blood darkened in uneven patches. Rowan crouched lower. The snow told a story, but not kindly. Here, something had resisted. The grooves wavered. One side dug deeper, then vanished, then returned. Beside the drag line was a boot print, large, squared at the toe, mostly filled in by new powder. Human, adult, moving with weight. Rowan stared at it for a long moment. His mind worked cleanly now, stripping away speculation. Living body, pulled. Intermittent resistance, at least one person. Possibly more. Koda gave a low breath through his nose. Not a growl. Something closer to grief, if dogs could make such a sound. Rowan looked at him. The German shepherd had lowered his head toward one patch of blood, but he was not sniffing eagerly now. His expression had changed. His amber eyes were fixed and distant, as if scent had opened a door to something older than training, and there was no fear in him. There was recognition of suffering. That, more than the blood, sent a chill under Rowan's skin. For a moment, the wood seemed to hold them both in the palm of an unseen hand. And then, Koda did something Rowan had never seen him do on a live trail. He stepped carefully around the blood, lowered his head, and touched his nose to the clean snow beside it, not disturbing the stain at all. A strangely gentle gesture, almost reverent. As if even the dog understood that whatever had happened here deserved witness before pursuit. Rowan felt the small hairs rise along his neck, not because the act was supernatural, because it was disciplined, because Koda, who would push through gunfire without hesitation, had chosen tenderness first. "Okay," Rowan said softly. "We'll follow." The trail grew harder after that. The ground sloped downward through a stand of birch and pine. Sunlight broke between the trunks, bright enough to blur the surface details, and Rowan had to move slowly, choosing each step. The drag marks faded where wind had polished the snow smooth. Blood appeared less often, thinner now, diluted by frost or distance, but every time Rowan paused, Koda found the line again. A smear on a low branch, a pressed hollow beside a rock, a faint red crescent where something had been dragged over exposed stone. Rowan's breathing stayed controlled, but his thoughts darkened. He still did not know what had bled. A dog was possible. Given the assignment, likely. But likelihood was not proof. The animal could have been wild. It could have been livestock. It could have been bait in a story designed for him to step into. He looked back once. The forest had closed behind him. No easy sightline to the cabin. No visible town. Good place for an ambush. He rested one hand lightly near his sidearm, not drawing it. Koda saw the motion and paused, ears working. Nothing moved. No voice. No engine. No howl. Only the soft crackle of frozen branches overhead. Then the dog turned sharply left. The blood trail bent toward a rock formation rising from the forest floor, a jagged shelf of gray stone half buried under snow. Wind had carved the drifts around it into smooth waves. At first, Rowan saw nothing but rock and shadow. Koda moved faster. "Koda," Rowan warned. The dog slowed, but the tension in his body changed from tracking to urgency. Rowan climbed the first low rise of stone, boots scraping against ice. Near the base of a narrow crevice, the snow was disturbed. Not heavily. Carefully. A small hollow had been dug or forced open between rock and root, partly sheltered from the wind. Pine needles had been dragged inside. There were tufts of pale fur caught on the stone. Rowan froze. A sound came from inside, so small it nearly vanished beneath the wind. A thin, broken whimper. Koda reached the hollow first. He did not force his way in. He lowered himself to the snow and stretched his neck forward, sniffing gently. Another whimper answered. Rowan dropped to one knee. Inside the narrow shelter, pressed together in a trembling knot, were 3 puppies. They were German Shepherd pups, no more than a few weeks old. Their small bodies muddy with black and tan markings still too soft to hold shape. Their eyes were barely open. Their ribs showed under damp fur. One had a strip of cream along its neck. Another had darker ears that twitched weakly at Koda's breath. The third lay half beneath the other 2, shivering so hard its whole body pulsed. No mother, no adult animal, no fresh corpse, Only 3 fragile lives left in a place too cold for miracles. God, Rowan breathed. He pulled off one glove with his teeth and reached in slowly, letting the pups smell his hand before touching them. They were cold. Too cold. The smallest barely reacted. Koda made a sound then. Not a bark, not a whine. A soft, deep vibration in his chest. Before Rowan could shift him back, the German Shepherd lowered his body fully into the snow beside the hollow, curling his warm flank against the opening. He tucked his front legs close, pressed his chest near the puppies, and began licking the nearest one with slow, careful strokes. Rowan stared. Koda had guarded children before. He had tracked wounded men. He had stood calm beside chaos. But this was different. This was not training. This was instinct walking into the room like an old god and kneeling beside the weak. "All right," Rowan whispered, voice rougher than he expected. "All right, buddy." He shrugged off his outer field layer and spread it across the snow. And one by one, he lifted the puppies from the hollow, checking each quickly. No visible bite wounds, no major bleeding. Hypothermia risk severe. Dehydration likely. Their paws were icy, their bellies hollow. Still alive. That was the only sentence that mattered. After wrapping them in the insulated layer, he checked the shelter and surrounding ground. The blood was heavier near the entrance of the crevice, dark, frozen where it had pooled beneath the edge of a rock. There were marks in the snow, not from the puppies. Too large. An adult animal had been there. It had turned, braced, maybe fought. A smear ran along the stone, Anstimo then away from the hollow, joining the drag marks again. Rowan stood very still. The shape of the event began forming, not complete, but sharp enough to cut. Chasso. Something wounded had brought the puppies here. Something had held the entrance. Something had been pulled away. He looked at the 3 trembling bundles in his jacket, then at the trail leading away into the trees. He wanted to follow it. Every trained part of him wanted the line, the answer, the target. But the puppies made another weak sound, and the decision was made for him. Not every mission began with pursuit. Some began with carrying what someone else had nearly died to protect. Rowan gathered the puppies against his chest. Koda rose immediately, snow clinging to his coat, eyes still fixed on the direction of the drag marks. "I know," Rowan said quietly, "but they go first." Koda looked at him. For a second, Rowan thought the dog might refuse. Not in disobedience, but in that strange moral certainty animals sometimes carried, as if the world had given them a simpler law than humans deserved. Then Koda stepped close to Rowan's side. Together, they started back through the bright, freezing woods, leaving behind the nameless blood, the disturbed snow, and the unanswered question breathing beneath every tree. Whose blood was it? And why had whoever took the body left the smallest lives behind? Rowan did not know yet. But as the puppies shivered against his chest and Koda walked beside him like a shadow with a heartbeat, he understood one thing with the old certainty of war. This was not the end of a trail. It was the beginning of one. By the time Rowan Hale reached the edge of town, the smallest puppy had stopped shivering. That frightened him more than the shaking had. Cold worked like a quiet thief. It did not always announce the moment it began to win. Sometimes the body stopped fighting because it had no warmth left to spend. Rowan walked fast, but not recklessly, holding the 3 German Shepherd pups inside the fold of his insulated field layer against his chest. Their little bodies were light in a way no living thing should have been. Bones, damp fur, weak breath. One pressed its nose blindly against the dark red thermal shirt beneath Rowan's combat shirt, searching for heat that was not mother's milk, and finding only the rough warmth of a stranger. Kota kept close to Rowan's left side, and the big German shepherd did not range ahead now. He did not sniff the roadside or glance toward the trees. He moved with a strange, solemn precision, as if he understood that the 3 small lives against Rowan's ribs had become the mission. His amber eyes scanned the street when they left the tree line. His ears shifted at every distant sound. A dog built for loyalty had become a guard for something even more fragile than loyalty. Windhaven Ridge looked brighter under the late morning sun, but the brightness did not soften it. A woman scraping ice from her porch stopped when she saw Rowan coming from the woods. Her shoulders tightened beneath her brown wool coat. A man loading feed sacks into the bed of a pickup paused with one gloved hand still gripping the burlap. Neither spoke. Rowan did not ask them to. He had no patience left for polite silence. The veterinary clinic sat near the eastern side of town, tucked between a closed bait shop and a small bakery with fogged windows. A faded wooden sign above the door read, "Ward Animal Care," in dark green letters. Someone had painted paw prints along the frame, probably years ago. The paint had chipped at the edges, but the front step was shoveled clean, the glass wiped clear, and a small brass bell hung inside the door. Rowan pushed in with his shoulder. Warmth hit him first. Then the smell. Antiseptic, wet fur, old coffee, rubber mats, and underneath it all the faint metallic scent that lived in every place where life was repaired, but not always saved. The waiting room was small. 4 plastic chairs lined one wall. A corkboard held notices for missing cats, vaccination schedules, and one old flyer about spaying and neutering, curled at the corners. A gray tabby cat with a torn left ear watched from a perch behind the reception counter, unimpressed by crisis. A young veterinary assistant looked up from a computer. She was in her early 20s, thin, pale, with strawberry blonde hair twisted into a messy knot and freckles scattered across her nose. Her blue scrubs were too large at the shoulders, and there was a nervous kindness in her face, the look of someone who still felt every wounded animal personally and had not yet learned how to hide it. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Dr. Ward." Rowan stepped toward the counter. "Hypothermia. 3 pups. Possible dehydration. No visible major trauma." The assistant blinked at the calmness of his voice, then moved so fast her rolling chair struck the wall behind her. A door opened from the exam area. Dr. Elena Ward came out wiping her hands on a towel. She was about 42, medium height, with compact, strong shoulders and the tired stillness of someone who had carried too many emergencies alone. Her dark brown hair was tied low at the nape of her neck, with loose strands falling near her temples. Her face was narrow, practical, and unadorned, the skin beneath her eyes faintly shadowed from too many late nights. She wore a faded blue-gray work coat over a charcoal sweater, dark jeans, and scuffed brown boots. Her eyes were calm at first glance, but Rowan recognized the speed beneath them. She saw details quickly. She survived by seeing them quickly. Her gaze went to the bundle in his arms, then to Koda, then to Rowan's boots, still crusted with forest snow and flecks of frozen red. For half a second, something passed across her face. Recognition. Not of Rowan, of the situation. "Treatment room," she said. No wasted questions. Rowan followed her through the door into a clean room with stainless steel tables, cabinets of labeled supplies, and a heat lamp mounted over one corner. The assistant hurried in behind them with towels. The tabby cat slipped through the door too, then decided the drama was beneath him and vanished under a bench. Elena spread a heated pad across the table. "Lay them here, slowly." Rowan did. The pups looked even smaller under the clinic lights. Their fur was clumped with ice and dirt. Their paws were the size of Rowan's thumbs. The smallest one barely lifted its head. Elena's hands changed as soon as she touched them. Outside the exam room, she had been guarded. Here, with the animals under her palms, she became precise, almost fierce. She checked gums, temperature, hydration, pulse. She murmured not to soothe Rowan, but to anchor the puppies. "Come on, little one. Stay with me. That's it. Breathe." The assistant brought warm towels and a bottle of fluid. Elena directed her without looking up. "Mara, heat packs, wrapped twice. Oral glucose. Start with the largest, then the smallest. No aggressive warming. We bring them back slow." Mara nodded quickly. Her hands trembled, but she obeyed well. Koda stood at the foot of the table, his nose lifted, eyes fixed on the pups. Rowan placed one hand lightly on the dog's harness. He expected tension, maybe a whine. Koda only watched, as if counting them. Elena noticed. "He yours?" she asked. "Yes." "He's trained?" "Yes." She did not ask trained for what. That told Rowan more than the question would have. For several minutes, the room became all motion and breath. Towels changed. Heat packs tucked near tiny bodies. A dropper touched small mouths. The largest puppy swallowed first, weak but determined. Mara let out a shaky laugh that almost became a sob. "There," she whispered. "There you are." The smallest did not respond. Elena bent closer, her face tightening. Rowan felt the old helplessness rise in him. It was not battlefield panic. It was worse. In combat, action had edges. Pull, lift, fire, move. But there were moments when life rested in a palm too small to bargain with, and all the training in the world became a stone in the pocket. Kota suddenly stepped forward, not enough to interfere, just close enough that his breath reached the smallest pup. The puppy's tiny nose twitched. Once, then again. A thin mouth opened. Elena froze with the dropper in her hand. The smallest pup turned its head toward Kota's breath and made a sound so faint it seemed less like a cry than a thread refusing to break. Mara covered her mouth. Rowan stared at Kota. The big shepherd's expression did not change. He simply stood there, calm and steady, giving the dying thing a reason to aim itself toward warmth. Elena fed the pup one drop, and then another. After the third, the little body shivered. This time, the shiver was life coming back. For a moment, no one in the room spoke. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to hum more softly. Rowan had seen men pray in foxholes without moving their lips. He had seen hardened operators touch a lucky coin before stepping into gunfire. He had never put much faith in signs. But watching that starving puppy turn toward Kota's breath, he felt something old and wordless move through the room. Not magic, not miracle. Something humbler, the stubborn mercy of living things. Elena looked up at him then, and the guarded look in her eyes cracked. "Where did you find them?" she asked quietly. "In the woods west of my cabin." Her hands paused for less than a second. Near the old rock shelf?" Rowan heard it. Too specific. "Yes." Mara's face went pale. She lowered her eyes immediately, pretending to fold a towel that was already folded. Rowan studied Elena. "You know the place?" Elena resumed checking the pups. "People hike out there sometimes. Not in this cold." "No." The room tightened. Rowan kept his voice even. I found blood leading to them. Drag marks. A boot print. Mara stopped breathing for a beat. Elena's jaw shifted. She glanced toward the front window, then toward the hallway leading to the waiting room. Fear did not make her face dramatic. It made it still. "Dr. Ward," Rowan said, "does this happen here often?" Elena opened her mouth. The brass bell on the front door rang. Once. A small sound. It moved through the clinic like a blade drawn slowly from a sheath. Mara flinched. Kota turned his head toward the waiting room, ears forward, body lowering half an inch. Elena closed her mouth. Heavy footsteps crossed the waiting room floor with unhurried confidence. Sheriff Marcus Kane appeared in the treatment room doorway, wearing his winter sheriff's jacket and the same polished calm he had carried in the street. Snow clung to the edges of his boots, but not much, as if even weather hesitated to touch him. His pale brown eyes moved from Rowan to Elena, then to the 3 puppies under the warming light. "Well," Kane said mildly, "busy morning." No one answered immediately. Kane smiled as though forgiving them for it. "Mr. Hale, I saw your truck by the clinic. I thought I'd check whether you needed anything. New place, unfamiliar roads, easy to get turned around." Rowan kept his hand on Koda's harness. "I'm fine." Kane looked at the puppies again. "Those yours?" The question was light. Too light. Before Rowan could answer, Elena stepped forward with a sound almost like a laugh. "They are now, apparently," she said. "Beautiful litter, aren't they? People come up here thinking they can handle northern winters. Then their dogs remind them nature has a vote." Mara stared at her. Kane's eyes shifted to Elena. For the first time, his smile did not reach even the shape of his mouth. "Funny," he said. "I didn't know Mr. Hale traveled with puppies." "Elena," Rowan said nothing. He let her lie. Because the lie was not clumsy. It was protective. Elena picked up the largest puppy and pretended to examine its belly, angling its neck away from Kane's view. Half frozen, but lucky. Another hour and they'd be gone. Kane stepped 1 pace into the room. Koda moved. Not forward, just sideways, placing his body slightly between Kane and the exam table. The sheriff noticed. His eyes lowered to the dog. "That one's protective." "He has judgment," Rowan said. Kane looked back at him, and something hard glinted behind the friendly mask. Dogs usually do, until someone teaches them bad habits. The words landed softly. The meaning did not. Elena's fingers tightened around the towel in her hand. Rowan let the silence stretch. Kane finally gave a small nod. "Well, if you need help, you know where my office is. Wouldn't want you chasing shadows in the woods and getting yourself hurt. I'll keep that in mind." "I'm sure you will." Kane turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. "Dr. Ward," he said without looking back, "don't forget we have that town safety meeting this afternoon." Elena's face lost a shade of color. "I remember." "Good." The bell rang again as he left. For several seconds after the front door closed, nobody moved. Then Mara exhaled, shaky and thin. Elena set the puppy down and removed her gloves slowly, as if her fingers had gone numb. Rowan looked at her. "You were going to say something." She did not meet his eyes. "No, I wasn't." "Yes," Rowan said. "You were." Elena turned toward the sink and washed her hands longer than necessary. Water ran over her knuckles, pink at first from antiseptic reflection, then clear. "These puppies need warmth, fluids, and feeding every 2 hours," she said. Her voice was professional again, but not steady. "They're weak, but they have a chance." And the blood? She shut off the faucet. For a moment, Rowan thought she might finally answer. Instead, she dried her hands and looked at Koda. The big shepherd still stood near the table, watching the puppies breathe. Elena's expression softened with something like grief. "Take them back to your cabin," she said quietly. "Keep them close. Keep him close too." Rowan understood what she was not saying. He gathered the treated puppies carefully into a warmed carrier Elena provided, each wrapped in a towel. Mara slipped a small bottle and feeding instructions into a paper bag without being asked. Her eyes flicked toward the front door as though expecting Kane to materialize again from the cold. At the exit, Elena touched the edge of the carrier, not quite stopping him, not quite letting him go. "If you hear anything tonight," she said, her voice barely above the heater's hum, "don't assume it's wildlife." Rowan held her gaze. "What is it then?" Elena looked past him, through the clinic window, to where Sheriff Kane's tire tracks cut clean lines in the snow outside. She swallowed. Something people here learned not to name. Rowan left the clinic with Koda at his side and 3 living puppies in his arms. Outside, the sun still shone over Windhaven Ridge. The snow glittered, and the town looked almost gentle. But now Rowan knew the gentleness was a costume, and somewhere beneath it, fear had a badge, a schedule, and a reason to care too much about 3 half-frozen pups. Rowan Hale carried the 3 puppies back to the cabin as if he were carrying sparks through a storm. The carrier Elena Ward had given him was old but clean, lined with warm towels that smelled faintly of lavender detergent and clinic antiseptic. Inside, the German Shepherd pups lay pressed together in a small trembling mound, their breathing weak but steadier than before. Every few steps, Rowan glanced down through the wire door to make sure the smallest one still moved. Kota walked beside him without drifting once. The big shepherd's amber eyes kept shifting between the road, the tree line, and the carrier. He moved with the solemn duty of a soldier escorting wounded civilians through hostile ground. No one on the street came close. A man sweeping snow from the bakery steps paused, then turned his face away. A woman behind the curtain of a second-floor window let the fabric fall the instant Rowan looked up. Windhaven Ridge had many windows. None of them felt open. The cabin waited at the town's western edge, half-shadowed by pine trees and winter sun. Rowan stepped inside, shut the door, and let the quiet settle around him. The fire had burned down to coals, but the room still held a pocket of warmth. He set the carrier near the hearth, removed his gloves, and knelt. "Easy now," he murmured. His voice sounded strange in the cabin, softer than it had any right to be. He unlatched the carrier and lifted the puppies one by one onto a folded wool blanket near the stove, and the largest, the one with the cream strip around its neck, made a faint grunt of complaint. The darker-eared pup tried to crawl beneath the blanket and failed halfway. The smallest one opened its mouth silently, then tucked its head against its sibling's side. Koda lowered himself beside them, not too close, not careless. He placed his large body in a curved wall around the blanket, leaving just enough room for Rowan to reach in. Then he began to lick the pups gently, one at a time, slow strokes across their damp heads and chilled backs. The motion was careful enough to look almost human in its restraint. Rowan watched for a moment. He had seen Kota clear rooms, track through rain, hold position under pressure, and ignore distractions that would have broken lesser dogs. But this patient tenderness, was not something Rowan had taught him. Maybe no one taught dogs the oldest laws. Maybe they remembered them. Rowan unpacked the paper bag Mara had slipped into the carrier. Formula, small bottles, feeding syringe. Written instructions in Elena's compact handwriting. Every 2 hours, keep warm, monitor gums. Do not overfeed. Return if breathing changes. At the bottom, beneath the medical notes, one sentence had been written and then scratched hard enough to nearly tear the paper. He held it close to the light. The words were not readable. Only pressure remained. A message stopped before it became a message. Rowan folded the paper carefully and placed it beside his field notebook. The first feeding took almost 40 minutes. The largest pup swallowed best, though clumsily, milk dribbling down its chin. The darker-eared one fought the syringe as if offended by charity. The smallest needed patience. 1 drop, wait, 1 drop, wait. Its tiny tongue moved only after Kota shifted closer and breathed warmly over its face. Rowan found himself smiling once, very faintly, when the dark-eared pup sneezed formula onto his thumb. "Yeah," he said. "Combat medicine is glamorous." Koda looked at him. Rowan almost laughed. Almost. Outside, the afternoon stretched cold and bright. Inside, the cabin filled with small sounds, the crackle of the revived fire, the faint squeaks of puppies trying to live, the soft scrape of Koda's tongue over fur. It should have been peaceful, but Rowan's mind did not release the clinic. Elena's face when Kane entered. Mara's flinch. Kane's eyes lowering to the puppies, calm as a blade laid flat on a table. Rowan had known corrupt men before. Loud ones were simple. They needed to be feared and made sure everyone knew it. Quiet ones were worse. They built rooms where no one had to be threatened twice. Sheriff Marcus Kane had not raised his voice once. That made the whole town quieter. By late afternoon, the puppies were warmer. Not safe, not yet, but no longer slipping away with every breath. The cream-necked one had enough strength to push its face into Koda's front leg. The dark-eared one tried to bite the edge of the blanket and fell asleep halfway through the battle. The smallest lay on its side, paws twitching in some dream too young to understand danger. Rowan sat on the floor with his back against the sofa, field notebook open on his knee. He wrote what he knew. Blood trail west of cabin. Drag marks. Human boot print. Victim alive when moved. 3 German Shepherd pups hidden in rock shelter. Elena recognized something, but withheld under pressure. Kane arrived at clinic after Rowan. Kane interested in puppies. He stopped writing. The last line looked too mild. Kane interested in puppies. No, Kane concerned about evidence. Rowan underlined the word once. Koda suddenly lifted his head. The movement was small, but Rowan's hand went still. What? The dog did not stand. His ears angled toward the blanket, not the door. One of the puppies had woken and was nosing blindly at the dark-eared sibling, and the 2 pups bumped heads, then began a weak, clumsy wrestling match, mouths opening and closing against each other's fur. It was not play, exactly. They were too young, too exalted. But some instinct had returned, some little spark of normal life. The dark-eared pup bit the cream-necked pup's loose neck fur and tugged. The cream-necked pup squeaked. Kota leaned in and separated them with his nose, patient as an old nursemaid and twice as dignified. Rowan reached forward to help. "That one's trouble," he murmured. As he gently untangled the dark-eared pup's mouth from its sibling's fur, his fingers brushed something stiff beneath the cream-necked puppy's collar line. He frowned. There was no collar, only fur. He lifted the pup carefully and parted the damp hair at the side of its neck. And at first, he thought it was a scab. Then the firelight shifted. Not a scab, a mark. Tiny, dark, and deliberate. Rowan reached for his penlight and angled the beam low. Beneath the thin puppy fur, just behind the left side of the neck, was a small stamped symbol. Not ink exactly, not a wound either. A narrow mark formed from 2 letters and a number, so small it might have been missed by anyone not trained to look for what others hid. NR3. Rowan did not breathe for a second. Koda's head came up again, eyes fixed on Rowan's hand. The puppy wriggled weakly, annoyed by the attention. Rowan lowered it back to the blanket, then checked the dark-eared one. Another mark. NR1. The smallest, NR2. Rowan sat back slowly. For a moment, the cabin seemed to tilt away from the ordinary world, and the fire still burned. The puppies still breathed. Kota still watched him. But the air had changed. What had been tragedy now had architecture. 3 marks. Sequential. Organized. Not pets. Not strays. Inventory. Rowan felt something cold move behind his ribs, colder than the weather outside. He thought of the scratched-out sentence on Elena's instruction sheet. He thought of Kane's polished boots in the clinic doorway. He thought of the old tire track half buried near the forest, and the town's eyes sliding away from him as if looking directly might make them responsible. The puppies were not just survivors. They were proof. And proof in a town like Windhaven Ridge was a dangerous thing to keep warm beside your fire. Koda lowered his head and rested his muzzle gently beside the smallest pup. The gesture steadied Rowan more than it should have. He took photographs of each mark with his field phone, using no flash. Then he copied them into the notebook. NR1, NR2, NR3. He added sketches of placement, approximate size, and condition. His handwriting remained neat. That mattered. When rage arrived, discipline had to arrive first. Outside, the sun began to sink. The cabin windows turned orange, then gray. Shadows gathered under the trees. Rowan secured the door, checked the windows, then set a chair where he could see both the puppies and the front approach. He kept the lights low. Koda refused food until Rowan set the bowl close enough for him to eat while still watching the pups. Even then, he took only a few mouthfuls before returning his chin to the blanket's edge. "You're going to wear yourself out," Rowan said. Koda blinked slowly. It was not agreement. Night folded over the cabin. The puppies slept in small, uneven piles. Rowan fed them again by lamplight, slower this time, careful to follow Elena's instructions. The largest took more. The dark-eared one sneezed again. The smallest swallowed 5 drops in a row, which felt absurdly like victory. Rowan checked the photos on his phone, then turned the device face down. He could send them through the secure channel. He should. But something held his thumb from the command. Not doubt. Timing. He did not yet know who in the local chain could see what. Kane had known enough already. The careless transmission might make the cabin a target before Rowan understood the board. So he wrote a coded note instead, cued it to send through a delayed, secure burst if he failed to cancel by morning. Old habit. Useful habit. Around midnight, the town became completely still. No wind. No passing tires. No branches shifting. The silence pressed against the cabin walls. Kota stood. Every part of him changed at once. His head lifted. His ears sharpened. his body aligned toward the west window. Rowan rose without sound. He crossed the room and looked out. At first, there was only snow and tree shadow. Then, far beyond the cabin, deep in the timber, a pale shape moved between trunks, not close enough to identify, not steady enough to be a person walking in the open. Koda gave one low, controlled rumble. The three puppies woke together, not one after another, together. Their tiny heads lifted toward the same dark window, as if something in their blood had heard a call no human ear could catch. Rowan stared at them. The room felt suddenly ancient, as if the little cabin had become a shrine for a warning no language could hold. Then the smallest puppy made a sound, not a whimper, a thin, broken, answering cry. Koda stepped between the blanket and the window. Rowan reached for his sidearm. The pale shape disappeared into the trees, and from far away, too faint to prove, came a single mechanical clank. Metal against metal. Rowan did not move for a long time. When the silence returned, it was no longer empty. It was listening back. Dawn did not arrive gently over Windhaven Ridge. It came sharp and white, pouring through the cabin windows until every corner looked exposed. The old wooden walls, the iron stove, the three sleeping puppies bundled near the hearth. Everything seemed too visible, as if the sun itself had decided to interrogate the room. Rowan Hale had spent the final hours before morning seated in the chair near the window, one hand resting close to his sidearm, his field notebook open on his knee. He had not slept. Koda had not either. The German shepherd lay beside the puppies, but his body had never fully relaxed. His cream-gray-black sable coat rose and fell with steady breathing, yet his ears kept shifting toward sounds Rowan could barely detect. And the dog looked calm only to someone who did not know working animals. Rowan knew better. Koda was not resting. He was holding position. The three puppies had survived the night. That fact should have brought relief, and it did, in small, careful pieces. The cream-necked pup took formula more eagerly now, pushing its tiny paws against Rowan's fingers as if offended by the pace of feeding. The dark-eared pup had developed a habit of biting the towel's edge with heroic seriousness. The smallest, still fragile as a candle flame, had begun to make soft noises in its sleep. Life was returning to them by inches. But the marks on their necks had changed the room. NR1, NR2, NR3. Rowan kept seeing the symbols even when he closed his eyes. Not names, numbers. He fed them again just after sunrise, careful and slow, then cleaned the syringe and warmed fresh towels near the stove. Koda watched every movement. When Rowan set the smallest pup down, the dog nudged it gently with his nose until it was tucked between the other two. "You've decided they're yours," Rowan said. Koda's eyes lifted to him. "Not yours," that look seemed to say. "Ours." Rowan rubbed 2 fingers once over the dog's harness, then stood. His back ached from the chair. His eyes burned. The body kept score even when the mind refused to sign the receipt. By mid-morning, Rowan knew he needed more than instinct and suspicion. He needed Elena Ward, but walking straight back to the clinic with questions would invite attention. Kane had already shown he liked appearing where he had not been called. Rowan had no doubt the sheriff would hear about any unusual movement before lunch, so he did what soldiers and hunted men had always done. He made the ordinary look ordinary. He stepped outside, chopped firewood, checked the generator, walked Kota around the cabin perimeter, and let the town see nothing dramatic. From the road, he was only a man settling into a winter rental. a stranger with a dog and a stove that needed feeding. Yet beneath each ordinary motion, he was mapping. Old tire impressions near the western tree line. Not fresh from this morning, but repeated. A narrow packed line behind the cabin where snow had been disturbed more than once over the last week. A distant rise where a vehicle could pass unseen from the main road. Windhaven Ridge had roads on paper. The forest had its own. Near noon, a truck rolled past slowly on the town road. Not a sheriff's vehicle, not a local pickup. A dark green utility truck with mud frozen along the wheel wells and a canvas-covered rear compartment. Its windows were tinted enough to hide the driver's face. The engine note was low, rough, older than the vehicle looked. Kota stood on the porch and watched it pass. No bark, no movement, only stillness. The truck did not stop. But the dark-eared puppy, inside the cabin near the stove, woke and released a thin, distressed cry. Koda turned so fast, Rowan's hand went to the porch rail. The shepherd stepped toward the door, ears rigid, nostrils flaring. Rowan followed him inside. The puppies were awake now, all three of them. Not hungry, not cold. Alert in the blind, trembling way of young animals responding to something deeper than understanding. The smallest one lifted its head and gave a weak, broken sound. Koda lowered his muzzle close. Then he raised his head toward the road. Rowan looked from the puppies to the door. The green truck was gone. For a moment, everything held in place. Then, from far off, carried strangely by the hard, cold air, came a sound Rowan had not heard clearly before. A dog, not barking, crying. It was faint, muffled by distance and metal, but Koda heard it with his whole body. His muscles tightened beneath his harness. His eyes changed. The disciplined guard beside the hearth became something older, faster, ruled by a law written before human commands. Koda, Rowan said, low. The dog did not move. Another cry came. This time, the cream-necked puppy answered with a weak squeal. Koda exploded toward the door. Rowan caught the harness handle at the last possible second. The force dragged his arm forward and slammed his shoulder against the doorframe. Koda, hold. The command struck the room like a dropped blade. For half a heartbeat, the shepherd froze. Training held. Then the distant cry came again, not from the puppies, from the direction the truck had gone. Koda twisted with sudden power, not in disobedience but in desperation. The harness slipped under Rowan's grip as the dog drove forward. The cabin door flew open. Cold air burst inside, scattering ash from the stove lip. Koda! The shepherd hit the porch, launched down the steps, and sprinted toward the road. Rowan moved after him. The world narrowed to snow, breath, and the dark line of Koda's body, racing away. Rowan saw the green truck turning at the far bend, not on the main road now, but onto a narrow service track that vanished between pines. Koda followed. Rowan ran. His boots bit into packed snow. The old combat pants pulled at his knees. His lungs filled with cold fire. He was fast for a man carrying years of war in his bones, but no human could match a shepherd in full drive over open ground. The truck slowed near the tree line. A rear flap lifted. Two men stepped out, and they moved quickly, not like startled locals, but like handlers used to animals. One was broad and heavy, wearing a black knit cap pulled low and a brown canvas jacket strained across his shoulders. The other was younger, narrow-faced, with a patchy beard and a nervous, jerking quality to his movements. Rowan could not hear what they said, only saw the broad one swing something from his hand. A loop pole. Kota reached the truck. He stopped just short of the rear gate, barking now, deep and furious, his attention fixed on whatever was inside. The broad man moved in from the side. The younger one flanked. "Koda! Out!" Rowan shouted. The dog turned his head at Rowan's voice. Only for a fraction. It was enough. The loop dropped over Koda's neck and shoulder. The broad man yanked hard. The younger one threw a dark blanket over Koda's head. The shepherd fought with terrifying force, twisting, driving backward, jaws snapping at fabric and air. Rowan was still 40 yards away, too far. The broad man looked up and saw him. Their eyes met. The man's expression changed from irritation to alarm. "Go!" he barked. The younger man slammed the rear gate. Koda's growl became muffled metal thunder from inside the truck. Rowan drew his sidearm, but did not fire. Too much distance. Moving vehicle. Unknown animals inside. Koda in the rear compartment. A shot could kill the only soul in the world who had never lied to him. The truck lurched forward, tires chewing snow and dirt, then vanished down the service track. Rowan reached the bend seconds later, breath hard but controlled, weapon still in hand. He stopped, not from surrender, from discipline. Rage wanted him to chase blind. Training put a hand around Rage's throat and made it look at the ground. The tire tracks were clear, deep tread, heavy load. Heading northwest. Service track compacted beneath fresh powder. This was not an accidental route. This was used. Rowan lowered his weapon and stared into the trees. For the first time since arriving in Windhaven Ridge, the mission became personal enough to be dangerous. And because it was dangerous, he forced himself to become colder. Back at the cabin, the puppies were crying. Rowan stood in the doorway for 1 second, listening to their thin voices rise in the warm room Kota had guarded all night. Then he moved. He secured the pups in the carrier with fresh heat packs. He checked the stove, locked the back window. Packed his field notebook, the photos of the neck marks, a compact tracker, and a small encrypted transmitter from the bottom of his duffel. Before leaving, he looked at the empty place beside the hearth. Koda's impression remained in the blanket. The sight nearly broke something in him. Nearly. He drove to the clinic without pretending anymore. Ward Animal Care was quiet when he entered. Mara was at the reception desk, but the moment she saw his face, she stood. "Where's Koda?" she asked. Rowan did not answer. Her face changed. "Elena!" she called, voice shaking. "Dr. Ward!" Elena came from the back hallway with a folder in one hand. When she saw Rowan holding the puppy carrier, but no shepherd beside him, she stopped. All the careful fear in her face became something heavier. Guilt. "They took him," Rowan said. Mara's hand went to her mouth. Elena closed her eyes briefly. Not surprise. That mattered. Rowan stepped closer. "You knew this could happen." Elena opened her eyes. "I knew dogs vanished. I didn't know they would take yours." "They didn't know he was mine." "No," she whispered. "They probably didn't." Rowan set the carrier gently on the counter. The puppies shifted inside, sleepy and alive. Elena looked at them, and her expression cracked with pain. "The marks," Rowan said. "NR 1 through 3. Elena looked toward the front windows. The street outside was empty. Still, she lowered her voice. "North Ridge." Rowan waited. She swallowed. Not an official name. That's what people call it when they're brave enough to call it anything. A private training operation outside town. It used to be a legitimate kennel years ago. Protection dogs, search dogs, police contracts. Then ownership changed. Records disappeared. Dogs started disappearing too. Kane? Elena did not answer at first. That was answer enough. Mara whispered, "Doctor." Elena looked at the younger woman, and something maternal moved through her tired face. "Go lock the front door." Mara hesitated. "Now." The assistant obeyed, hands trembling as she turned the sign to closed and twisted the deadbolt. Elena led Rowan into the treatment room and shut the door. "When I first noticed the marks," she said, "I reported it, quietly, to County Animal Control. 2 days later, Sheriff Kane came here and told me the complaint had been investigated and dismissed. He knew details I never gave him directly." "What happened after?" "A man named Peter Voss asked questions." Elena's voice thinned. "He owned 2 Belgian Malinois. Good dogs. Expensive. Trained. But loved. They vanished. He kept pushing. Then his truck went off an icy road outside town. He survived, but barely. After that, people stopped pushing." She rubbed her hands together as if washing them without water. "Elena," Rowan said, quieter now. "The sounds at night." She looked at him. "They use sound cues," she said. "Recorded howls, whistles, engine roots, not for wolves, for dogs. To move them, agitate them, locate them if they break containment. Some of the trained dogs respond before they even understand why. It gets into them." Rowan thought of Kota tearing toward the road. His jaw tightened until it hurt. "They were carrying dogs in that truck." "Yes." "Route?" "I don't know the whole route." "What do you know?" Elena hesitated, then crossed to a cabinet. From behind a stack of old vaccine logs, she pulled a folded paper map, worn at the creases. She laid it on the metal table. "There's an old logging service road northwest of your cabin. It doesn't show on most public maps. Locals used it before the county closed that section. The trucks still use it." Rowan leaned over the map. A road like a scar cut through forest and ended near a ridge marked by an abandoned mill symbol. Elena touched the paper lightly. "I never went there." "But you kept the map." Her eyes lifted to his. Cowardice and hope sometimes look the same from the outside. Rowan studied her face. Not weak, not cowardly. Wounded by years of choosing survival one day at a time. "No," he said. "They don't." For the first time, Elena's eyes filled, though no tears fell. Mara knocked once and entered without waiting. "Sheriff's cruiser just turned onto the street." Elena went pale. Rowan folded the map and tucked it inside his shirt. He lifted the puppy carrier. Elena gripped his arm before he could move. Her hand was cold. "If you go after him," she said, "don't go as a man looking for his dog." Rowan held her gaze. Go as the man they should have prayed never found the road. Outside, tires crunched over snow. Rowan left through the rear exit with the puppies in one hand, the map against his chest, and Koda's absence burning beside him like a second heart. The hunt had begun. Rowan Hale left Ward Animal Care through the rear door with the map folded against his chest and the 3 puppies breathing inside the carrier at his side. He did not run. Running invited attention. Instead, he moved through the narrow service alley behind the clinic, past stacked crates, frozen trash bins, and a rusted snow shovel leaning against brick. The air smelled of old flour from the bakery next door and cold oil from a generator somewhere behind the building. In front of the clinic, Sheriff Marcus Kane's cruiser rolled to a stop with the lazy confidence of a man who believed every street belonged to him. Rowan did not look back. He crossed behind the bait shop, followed a shoveled path toward a line of bare shrubs, and reached his truck from the blind side. And the puppies stirred when he set the carrier carefully on the passenger floor, wrapped in an extra blanket. Their tiny sounds made something in his chest tighten. He had lost Kota for the moment. He would not lose them too. Before starting the engine, Rowan pulled the encrypted transmitter from his field pouch. It was small, matte black, old military habit turned civilian insurance. A narrow device built for short-burst location packets, not conversation. He powered it on, entered a coded distress marker, attached the images of the puppy marks, then selected a delayed repeating burst routed through an off-grid relay. If he disappeared, the signal would keep speaking. If he survived, he could cancel it. He waited until the first green light flashed, and then he tucked the transmitter beneath the driver's seat. "Good," he whispered, but his voice carried no comfort. He drove away from the clinic without speeding. At the edge of town, he saw Kane's cruiser in the rearview mirror turn into the clinic lot. Rowan imagined the sheriff stepping inside with polished calm, asking Elena questions wrapped in courtesy. He imagined Mara trying not to tremble. Elena had chosen to speak. That meant the town had shifted, maybe only by an inch. Sometimes an inch was enough to start an avalanche. Rowan returned to the cabin first. He did not like it, but leaving the puppies in the truck while he tracked armed men through winter forest would be cruelty disguised as urgency. He carried them inside, set them near the stove with fresh heat packs, checked their breathing, and secured the cabin tighter than before. The door bar, the rear window latch, a motion alarm rigged from wire, a tin cup, and a shell casing near the porch steps. Simple things worked when men got arrogant. The pups complained weakly when he left. The sound followed him out like a small accusation. He stood on the porch for 1 second, looking at the empty place where Koda should have been. Snow had already softened the shepherd's last prints near the steps. The forest beyond the yard stood white and silent. Rowan let himself feel the loss for exactly 1 breath. Then he closed the door. The old service road began where Elena's map said it would, northwest of the cabin, beyond a shallow creek hidden under snow. Rowan drove only part way, then pulled the truck into a stand of young pines and covered the windshield with a gray tarp dusted in loose powder. From there, he continued on foot. The tire tracks were clear. The green utility truck had carried weight. Its rear tires cut deep into the snow, leaving ribbed impressions where the tread bit through to frozen mud. Rowan followed from the tree line rather than the road itself, moving parallel to the track, using the pines as cover. His old work boots made little noise. His worn combat pants brushed against low branches. The gray tactical shirt beneath his outer layer gave him freedom to move, familiar as a second skin. The forest changed as he went deeper. Near town, the woods had felt watched. Here, they felt used. Branches had been trimmed back along the service road. Not recently, but often enough to keep vehicles from scraping. A black cable ran half buried along one ditch, disguised beneath snow and pine needles. Rowan spotted a trail camera strapped high to a spruce, its casing painted bark brown. Professional enough to catch amateurs, lazy enough to miss ghosts. He moved around its field of view. After nearly 2 miles, the land rose toward a ridge. Through the trees, Rowan saw the first fence, not the kind a farmer built. 10 feet high, chain link reinforced with dark privacy mesh. Snow piled along the base, but the top was clear, edged with angled wire. And beyond it stood the remains of an old lumber compound, long, low buildings of corrugated metal, a loading shed, a central yard, and a 2-story office structure with dark windows. Someone had repaired parts of it with money and secrecy. New cameras watched from old eaves. Fresh tire tracks cut between buildings. A generator throbbed somewhere behind the main shed. North Ridge. The name felt too clean for what it was. Rowan settled behind a fallen log and watched. 2 guards moved along the inner fence line. One was the broad man who had taken Kota, the black knit cap still low over his head. His brown canvas jacket now unzipped to reveal a dark thermal layer beneath. He carried a shock baton at his belt and walked with the bored cruelty of a man who had stopped seeing animals as alive. The younger, narrow-faced man followed near the loading bay, smoking despite the cold, shoulders hunched, rifle slung carelessly but present. A third man emerged from the office. He was older than the others, maybe late 40s, with a thick neck, cropped gray hair, and a limp that made his right boot drag slightly. His face was broad and pitted by old acne scars, and his expression carried the permanent irritation of someone who believed intelligence was measured by how often people obeyed him. He wore a dark parka with no insignia and held a clipboard in one gloved hand. Rowan named him in his mind. Supervisor. Men like that often confused authority with volume. The loading shed doors opened. Sound rolled out. Dogs. Not 1 or 2. Many. Barking, whining, metal rattling against metal. The noise struck Rowan harder than he expected. Not because it was loud, but because of the layers in it. Panic, anger, exhaustion, pleading. Different breeds, different throats, all compressed into one suffering machine. His eyes narrowed. He scanned the yard for Koda. Nothing. Then the broad handler dragged a cage from the back of the green truck. Rowan's pulse slowed. Inside the cage, Koda stood with his head low and his shoulders squared, the black harness still on him, dark red trim visible beneath a smear of snow and road dirt. A catch pole rested against the cage bars. Koda was not bleeding, not visibly, but his eyes burned with controlled fury. The broad handler kicked the cage once. "Quiet, you fancy bastard." Koda did not flinch. Rowan's finger tightened against the frozen bark of the log. For one clean second, killing the man seemed less like violence than weather. But he did not move. The handler dragged Koda's cage toward the main shed. As it passed another open doorway, a shape inside lifted its head. Rowan saw her then, a female German shepherd, larger than the puppy's small bones had promised, but painfully thin. Her coat should have been black and tan, perhaps sable like Kota's, yet it was dulled by grime, old blood, and exhaustion. One ear bent at a damaged angle. Her ribs showed beneath matted fur. A dark wound marked one shoulder, clumsily bandaged. She stood inside a kennel enclosure, legs shaking, but her eyes, amber, fierce, and unbearably tired, followed Kota's cage with recognition not of him, but of what he was, a trained dog, a living ally. Rowan felt the shape of the truth settle in his chest. The blood in the woods had been hers. The stand at the rock hollow had been hers. The 3 numbered pups in his cabin were hers. She had not abandoned them. She had bought them time with her body. The female shepherd took one step toward Kota's cage. The supervisor struck the bars of her kennel with his clipboard. "Back, Mira!" The name landed in Rowan's mind like a small blade. Mira. The mother dog recoiled, but only physically. Her eyes did not lower. Rowan eased backward from the fallen log and began circling toward the blind side of the shed. He had enough to report, enough to wait for the signal to bring help. But Kota was inside. Mira was inside. Waiting had a cost measured in breath, pain, and whatever men like Kane decided to move before dawn. Rowan found the weak point near the drainage ditch, where snow had piled against the fence and the cameras crossed poorly due to a sagging section of old roofline. He cut through the lower mesh with a compact tool, slow and quiet, then slid beneath into the compound. The yard smelled of diesel, dog waste, wet metal, and fear. He moved along the wall of the main shed, keeping beneath the camera angle. Through a cracked side window, he saw rows of kennels. Belgian Malinois, German Shepherds, a Doberman with gray around the muzzle. 2 young shepherd mixes pressed together in one cage. Some watched him. Some did not lift their heads. Koda's cage had been set near a rear work area. The dog saw him before any man did. No bark, no movement. Only the slightest shift of the eyes. Rowan's throat tightened. That was Koda's gift. Even trapped, even furious, he knew silence could be rescue. Rowan slipped through a side door, whose lock had been replaced cheaply. He bypassed it in 6 seconds. The shed interior swallowed him in dim yellow light and the harsh stink of confinement. He reached Koda's cage. "Easy," he breathed. Koda's tail moved once, low and brief. The lock was a heavy padlock. Rowan took out the pick. He had just set this tool when a voice behind him said, "Hands where I can see them." Rowan went still. The broad handler stood 10 feet away with a pistol in one hand and a shock baton in the other. The younger man came in from the opposite aisle, rifle now raised. Between them, the supervisor limped into view, face sour with satisfaction. Koda's growl began low. The broad handler jabbed the shock baton through the bars, not touching yet, only close enough for the electric crackle to jump blue in the dim light. Kota froze. Rowan slowly raised his hands. The supervisor smiled. "Smart man." Rowan looked at Kota. Not weakness. Choice. He could kill 1 man, maybe 2, but not before the baton hit Kota, not before the rifle swung, not before cages became chaos, so he let them take him. They zip-tied his wrists behind his back, hard enough to cut skin. The younger guard searched him badly, missing the small transmitter sewn into his inner belt seam, but finding his sidearm and knife. The broad handler shoved him forward through the shed toward the central yard. Kota slammed once against the cage bars. The sound shook every dog in the building. "Don't," Rowan said without turning. Kota stopped. The guards noticed. So did Mira. From her enclosure, the injured mother dog stared at Rowan with a strange, piercing focus. Not trust. Not yet. But recognition of the command, recognition of restraint. Outside, the yard had grown colder. The supervisor marched Rowan toward the office building. Before they reached it, the front door opened. Sheriff Marcus Kane stepped out. He wore no hat, though snow drifted in the air. His uniform jacket was buttoned neatly beneath a dark winter coat. He looked almost bored, as if Rowan's capture had interrupted paperwork rather than revealed corruption. "Mr. Hale," Kane said, "you are becoming inconvenient." Rowan said nothing. Kane walked closer, his polished boots crunching lightly over packed snow. "I tried to be neighborly. You tried to manage me." A faint smile. "Same thing. In small towns?" The supervisor shifted. "We need to move tonight. He found the road. Fed boys may have his check-in. Kane's eyes did not leave Rowan. I know. The broad handler spat into the snow. And the bitch caused all this. Dragged her halfway through the woods, and she still found a way to hide the litter. Kane's gaze flicked toward the shed. Mira heard the voice, even from inside. Rowan heard her throw herself once against the kennel door. The handler laughed. She's still got teeth, I'll give her that. Kane's expression sharpened. Load the inventory. All of it. We transfer before midnight. What about him? The supervisor asked. Kane looked at Rowan with calm, empty eyes. There's a ravine north of here, bad roads, a dangerous dog, a tragic accident while pursuing a stolen animal. He shrugged lightly. People believe simple stories when they are tired. Rowan held Kane's gaze. Inside his mind, the transmitter's green flash seemed to pulse again. The signal had gone out. Maybe received. Maybe not. He only needed time. So Rowan smiled, small and cold. Kane noticed. For the first time, irritation disturbed his face. What's funny? Rowan shifted his bleeding wrists against the zip tie, feeling the plastic bite deeper. You still think this is your town? Kane stepped close enough that Rowan could smell coffee on his breath. It is. Rowan looked past him, toward the shed where Koda waited, where Mira stood wounded and unbroken, where dozens of dogs breathed behind metal doors. No, Rowan said quietly. It's just where you've been hiding. The slap came fast, hard enough to turn his head. Rowan let it happen. Pain cleared the last warmth from him. Kane leaned in. Move him inside. We leave nothing behind. The guards shoved Rowan toward the office. Behind him, from the shed, Koda began to growl again. Not loud, not wild. A steady sound, low as thunder under snow. Rowan heard it and lowered his chin, hiding the faintest breath of relief. Koda was alive. Mira was alive. The signal was speaking. And the night had not yet decided who it belonged to. They put Rowan Hale in the old office building, not because it was secure, but because men like Sheriff Marcus Kane believed fear was a lock stronger than steel. The room smelled of dust, stale coffee, and cold paper. A cracked desk sat beneath a window filmed with frost. Old lumber permits curled in a rusted filing cabinet. On the wall hung a faded photograph of the mill in better days, when men still came here to cut timber instead of hide sins. Rowan stood with his wrists zip-tied behind him, shoulders squared, blood drying where the plastic had bitten into his skin. His jaw ached from Kane's slap. His body recorded pain as information and filed it away. Pain was weather, temporary, useful only if it taught direction. Outside, the yard moved with urgency. Engines coughed awake. Metal doors groaned. Men shouted to each other in short, angry bursts. The whole hidden compound had shifted from routine cruelty into evacuation. Rowan could hear cages rattling in the main shed, dogs barking in waves as handlers dragged them toward trucks. Kane had given the order to move. That meant the signal had frightened him. Or Rowan had. Both were useful. The broad handler with the black knit cap stood near the office door, pistol low in one hand, shock baton clipped to his belt. His face was flushed from cold and annoyance, heavy jaw shadowed with stubble. He looked like a man who trusted his strength because it had solved most of his problems. Beside him, the younger narrow-faced guard paced near the window, rifle shifting from hand to hand, and his patchy beard did nothing to hide the nerves twitching around his mouth. The supervisor with the limp was outside, barking orders. Kane was gone for the moment. That was the mistake. Men who believed themselves necessary often left others to guard what they did not understand. Rowan lowered his head slightly and listened. Koda was somewhere in the shed. Mira was somewhere beyond him. The dogs knew more than the men. Rowan could feel it in the sound of the compound. Their barking was changing, less random now, more focused. Fear had edges, but so did hope. Sometimes hope sounded like claws striking metal. The broad handler glanced at Rowan. "What are you smiling at?" Rowan had not known he was. "Nothing. Keep it that way." The younger guard swallowed. Kane said move him after the dogs. "Kane says a lot." The broad one rolled his shoulders. "We move him when I say." Rowan looked at the window. The glass reflected the room faintly. He saw the broad handler near the door, the younger guard beside the window, and himself between them, hands bound, face calm. He also saw the old office phone cord hanging from the desk, brittle and unused, and a rusted metal paper tray half fallen to the floor. Small tools. Small moments. War had taught him that giants died from small moments poorly respected. Outside, Kota growled. Not loud, not wild. A controlled, low sound, steady as distant thunder under snow. The broad handler stiffened. "That dog again." The younger guard shifted. "Maybe we should dose him." "No time." Kota growled again. This time, Rowan answered. Not with words. He drew a breath through his nose and released a low, almost inaudible sound from the back of his throat. A two-part signal. Short, then held. Not a whistle. Not a command anyone in the room would recognize. Something he had used with Koda in training when silence mattered more than speech. Hold fire. Wait for break. The broad handler frowned. What was that? Rowan looked at him blankly. What was what? Then Koda went silent. Complete silence. That was when Rowan knew the dog had heard. The younger guard took a step toward the window. Why'd he stop? The broad handler cursed and opened the office door. Stay here. Watch him. The moment the broad handler crossed the threshold, Rowan moved. He did not lunge first. He stepped backward, driving his bound wrists against the corner of the rusted filing cabinet. The plastic zip tie cut deeper into his skin, then stretched. Once, twice. The younger guard spun toward him, rifle lifting. Rowan dropped. The first shot never came. The rifle barrel struck the desk as Rowan kicked the old office chair into the guard's knees. The man stumbled forward. Rowan drove his shoulder into the guard's ribs and slammed him against the wall. Air left the younger man in a sharp grunt. Rowan hooked the dangling phone cord with his bound hands, looped it over the guard's wrist, and twisted. The rifle fell. The younger guard reached for a knife. Rowan headbutted him once, clean and controlled. The man sagged to the floor, conscious enough to regret choices, not conscious enough to make new ones. Rowan snatched the fallen knife, sawed through the zip tie, and flexed blood back into his hands. The broad handler turned in the doorway too late. Koda arrived behind him like winter-given teeth. The German shepherd hit the man from the side, all muscle and fury, driving him against the doorframe. The pistol clattered to the floor. The handler swung the shock baton free, but Rowan closed the distance and caught his wrist before the current could touch Koda. For 1 second, man, dog, and handler strained together in the narrow doorway. Koda's amber eyes burned. Rowan twisted the handler's wrist until the baton dropped, then drove an elbow into the man's jaw, and the broad handler collapsed across the threshold, snow and dust rising from his coat. Koda did not chase. He turned to Rowan. For the first time since the truck had taken him, the dog made a sound almost too soft to be heard. A breath. A greeting. Rowan dropped to one knee and grabbed the harness handle, pressing his forehead briefly against Koda's head. "Good boy," he whispered. "Good boy." Koda's body trembled once, not from fear, but from the effort of holding himself together. Then a scream cut through the yard. Not human. Mira. Rowan rose. The final debt had called its name. They moved out of the office into a yard gone frantic. Snow churned beneath boots and tires. One truck stood backed toward the loading shed, rear doors open, cages stacked inside. Two handlers had dropped their poles and were running toward the front gate, where blue and red lights flickered faintly beyond the trees. The cavalry had not arrived fully yet, but the mountain had seen their torches. Rowan's signal had worked. From the north access road came the first sharp command through a loudspeaker, distorted but unmistakable. "Federal Task Force, drop your weapons!" Kane stood near the main shed, one arm locked around Mira's neck. The injured German shepherd mother was half dragged against him, her body shaking from exhaustion. A short leash was twisted cruelly tight near her collar. Kane held a pistol low against her ribs, using her body as a shield. His polished calm had cracked at last. Without it, he looked smaller. Not weak, exactly. Meaner, like a man stripped down to the animal he had always been. "Back up!" Kane shouted. "Everyone back up!" The supervisor with the limp lay face down in the snow near the loading bay, hands cuffed by two agents in dark tactical jackets. The younger guard was down inside the office. The broad handler groaned behind Rowan. Other men scattered, some dropping weapons, some raising hands as flashlights and rifles appeared along the fence line. But Kane still had Mira, and Mira, wounded and starving and stolen, still stood. Her amber eyes found Rowan. Then they found Koda. Koda stepped forward, but Rowan's hand tightened on the harness. "Wait!" Koda shook beneath the command. Kane saw him and laughed, breath ragged. "Of course, the hero and his dog. You people always need a story." Rowan kept his voice low. "Let her go. You first." Kane backed toward a waiting snowmobile near the side path. "Weapon down. Dog back. Or I put her down right here." Mira's legs nearly buckled. Kane jerked the leash. The mother dog did not cry out. That silence did more to Rowan than a scream would have. He saw, in that moment, the whole story hidden beneath the snow. Mira bleeding through the trees, hiding her pups in stone, being dragged away, still fighting. A mother made into property. A living creature, numbered by men who understood cost and forgot value. Kane thought he held a hostage. He did not understand he was holding a survivor. Rowan slowly lowered his stolen pistol into the snow. Kota looked up at him, stunned. "Easy," Rowan murmured. Kane smiled. "Smart." But Mira moved first. It was so sudden that even Kane failed to understand it until it had already happened. Her front legs folded, not from weakness, but with purpose. She dropped her weight straight down, twisting her shoulder into the leash. Kane's grip slipped. The pistol shifted away from her ribs. In the same motion, Mira rolled under his arm, a maneuver too clean to be accident, too practiced to be instinct alone. Training, memory, defiance. Koda lunged forward at Rowan's release. Mira came up on 3 good legs and drove herself into Kane's knees. Not enough to kill, enough to break balance. Kane stumbled backward, weapon arm rising. Koda hit his wrist before he could aim. The pistol flew into the snow. Rowan crossed the distance and slammed Kane to the ground. The sheriff landed hard, all air leaving him. Rowan pinned him with one knee between the shoulder blades and pulled Kane's own cuffs from his belt. For a second, Kane tried to speak. Rowan leaned close. This town was never yours. Then he locked the cuffs. Around them, the yard surrendered. Agents swept the sheds. Handlers were restrained. Cameras were seized. Cages were opened carefully, one by people who knew frightened animals needed rescue, not chaos. Mara arrived in a county vehicle with Elena, both wrapped in winter coats, both pale but steady. Elena ran straight to Mira. The mother dog had collapsed in the snow. Rowan moved toward her, but Koda reached her first. He lowered himself beside Mira, touching his nose to her shoulder. She lifted her head weakly. Her eyes found Rowan again. Elena knelt, hands already checking wounds. "She's alive," she said, voice trembling. "Barely, but alive." Mira tried to stand. "Elena," Rowan said. "I know." But Mira would not settle. With a strength that seemed borrowed from the gods of all lost things, she pushed herself up on trembling front legs. One paw folded inward. Then the other came beside it. Her chest lowered. For a second, it looked like collapse. Then, Rowan understood. Her two front paws were pressed together in the snow. Not perfectly. Not like a trick performed for praise. Like a wounded mother giving the only gesture her broken body could offer. Mira bowed her head toward him. The yard faded. The agents, the sirens, Kane cursing into the snow, even Koda's breathing. All of it fell away. Rowan had seen medals pinned on uniforms. He had seen flags folded over coffins. He had seen men salute with hands that shook from grief. None of it struck him harder than that half-starved dog, bleeding in the snow, trying to thank him for saving what she had nearly died to protect. Rowan knelt before her. "No," he whispered, voice rough. "You don't owe me anything." Mira's tired eyes held his, and perhaps she understood. Perhaps she did not. But she leaned forward and touched her cold nose to his hand. 3 weeks later, Windhaven Ridge looked different beneath the same northern light. The town had not become innocent. No town ever did. But its silence had cracked. Sheriff Marcus Kane and the men of North Ridge were in custody. The dogs had been catalogued, treated, and returned where possible. Some had no homes to return to. Those would be placed carefully, Elena insisted, with the stubborn ferocity of a woman who had rediscovered her own voice. Mara no longer flinched when the clinic bell rang. Peter Voss, thin and scarred from the old crash Elena had mentioned, came to identify one of his missing Malinois. He was a tall, weathered man in his late 50s, with silver hair, a limp from the accident, and eyes that filled when the dog recognized him. He did not speak for several minutes. He only held the animal's head against his chest and shook quietly in the clinic yard. Rowan watched from a distance and did not intrude. Some reunions were sacred. Kota healed fast. A bruise along his shoulder. A cut near one ear. Nothing permanent, though Rowan suspected the dog would remember the truck forever. Dogs remembered differently than men. Cleaner, maybe, without the vanity of pretending not to. Mira recovered more slowly. Elena kept her at the clinic with the 3 puppies until she could stand without shaking. The pups grew round-bellied and loud, transforming from fragile sparks into small, chaotic storms. The dark-eared one chewed everything. The cream-necked one bullied the food bowl. The smallest followed Kota whenever he visited, tiny paws stumbling after the big shepherd like a moon chasing a planet. On Rowan's last morning in Windhaven Ridge, the sky was clear. He loaded his truck outside the clinic while Koda sat beside the open passenger door. His mission was complete. Reports filed. Evidence secured. Federal teams still worked the compound, but Rowan's part was done. Elena came out carrying one of the puppies. Her dark hair was tied low, her face tired but lighter than before. "You leaving before they name a street after you?" she asked. Rowan glanced at the town square. "I'm trying to prevent that." She smiled faintly. Good. They'd spell it wrong. Mira appeared behind her. She moved carefully, still thin, but alive in every line. Her coat had been cleaned. The wound on her shoulder was healing. Her amber eyes were no longer wild with exhaustion. The 3 puppies tumbled behind her, fat and clumsy, turning the clinic steps into a battlefield of paws. Koda stood. Mira walked to Rowan. No one called her. No one guided her. She stopped in front of him, lifted her head, and pressed her forehead gently into his hand. Not a trick, not a plea, a farewell. Rowan rested his palm against her warm fur. For once, he did not search for words. Koda stepped beside Mira, and for a few quiet seconds the 2 German shepherds stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the bright northern sky. The soldier's dog, and the mother who had refused to surrender. Then Mira turned back to her puppies. Rowan watched her go, something in his chest easing with each step she took toward life instead of fear. He climbed into the truck. Koda jumped in beside him, then looked once through the windshield at the clinic, the puppies, Elena, and the town that had learned the price of silence. Rowan started the engine. As they drove away, the smallest puppy broke from the others and toddled to the edge of the lot, giving one tiny, ridiculous bark after the truck. Koda's ears perked. Rowan laughed. It surprised him, that sound. Light. Real. Behind them, Windhaven Ridge grew smaller in the mirror. Ahead, the road opened beneath clean sunlight. And for the first time since arriving, Rowan did not feel the forest watching him. He felt it, letting him go. In the end, Rowan did not find a miracle in a church, a prayer book, or a perfect sky. He found it in the snow. He found it in 3 tiny lives that should not have survived the cold. He found it in a loyal dog who ran toward danger because love gave him no other choice. And he found it in a wounded mother who, even after suffering, still had enough courage left to protect the man who saved her children. Maybe that is how God often works in this world. Not always through thunder, not always through angels with shining wings. Sometimes, God sends a sign through a paw print in the snow, a cry in the dark, or a soul brave enough to stop and help when everyone else looks away. In everyday life, we may not face hidden forests, corrupt men, or impossible rescue missions, but we all meet moments where kindness asks something from us. A hungry animal on the roadside, a neighbor suffering in silence, a stranger who needs help, a truth that deserves to be spoken. And when we choose compassion over fear, courage over comfort, and mercy over silence, maybe we become part of the miracle someone else has been praying for. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who believes in loyalty, courage, and the quiet miracles God still places in our path. Leave a comment below and tell us where you are watching from. And if you want more stories about brave people, loyal dogs, and the light that can still be found in the darkest places, please subscribe to the channel. May God bless you, protect your family, and guide your heart toward kindness every day.